Hey, it's Matt Burton with SandFlippers. Before we jump into today's lesson, I wanted to let you know I have a free tax deed masterclass for you. It's on how I get land deals without any marketing spend. It's something that every land investor should definitely know about. Check it out after the video. All right, let's jump in. Today we're breaking down how I run comps and safely arrive at my maximum allowable bid, or MAB for short, especially when something unusual is going on with the property. This was actually requested by one of my students, and it's something every tax deed or land investor should know. So here's the property I'm using for today's example. We are using an indispensable tool, in my opinion, ID.land. I could not do this business without this. And you're gonna see, we talked about on the last video how these overlays right here, where you can pull up, floodplains, and you can pull up transmission lines, railroads, all kinds of hidden deal killers. If you saw my last video, we talked about how floodplains and transmission lines can be deal killers. But we're going to kind of flip things on their head today, and I'm going to show you exactly how I decide whether it's still a safe deal, even though, as you can see, like more than half of this property is inside a floodplain. Well, let's zoom in a little bit. First thing we like to see is great road access. It's got a pretty major road there, and you can see on the pro side, great road access. Another pro is development. So you see houses across the street. You see behind the property, we've got a pretty big spread back there. We go up here, again, development is always good because we have infrastructure there, right? They're gonna have power, internet, and it's a pretty good sized piece of land, even though, again, half of it is in a floodplain. We really care about, well, how much of it is going to be buildable. So I'm going to use a new tool we haven't done before, is the measuring tool. Just go ahead and click on the ruler, and then we're just going to kind of see like how much of this property abutting against the road is actually where somebody could put a manufactured home or build a home, put a little cabin on there. There's a lot of hunting and camping that goes on in this area. So you can see that we have 2.5, so we're just gonna call it 2.5 acres, still a good chunk of land. The total size of this is 4.5 acres, so more than half of it is buildable. So that's good, considering you kind of see a similar situation over here across the way on the other side of the floodplain. Or what we wanna know is how big of an area did they have to put their structure. So let's see if it's pretty comparable to what we're looking at here. That kind of got in my way, so we'll have to factor in a little bit more. So there you go. We're pretty much looking at apples and apples, right? Probably pretty close to 2.5 acres, what they needed to put 3 different structures. So this gives us, again, confidence that this has appeal, desire, buildability, etc. So, step 2, we want to pull up some comps. Let's look at a few comparable sales in the area. Ideally, we'd like to find ones that are dealing with a little bit of the floodplain as well, to see if there was a massive price value difference because part of the property was in a floodplain. So I always use Zillow for my comps because I'm just used to it, and I've done it this way for so many years. A lot of my students say Redfin is better, but I found that Zillow works most of the time. Redfin is better in some areas, and some people use Realtor.com. But again, stick with what works best for you. We're going to use Zillow. What I did is I just found one of these neighbor houses, plugged in their address. So we are right in that same area. This is where our property is, right here on Harworth Road. So I keep it simple, right? I'm just looking for comparables that have sold within the last year. So I've changed this to sold. I changed the home type to just land. And then the only thing I change over here is kind of the size I'm looking for. Since our property is, we'll just call it right around 5 acres, I do 2 to 10 acres, and then I filter out sales that have just sold in the last 12 months. That is perfect world, what we're looking for. So when we hit apply, since our property is right here and the floodplain, if we zoom out, kind of get the same size view a little bit. You can see that the other comparable properties are not great because, they're not really dealing with that floodplain issue that we want to see over there. So we're kind of looking for properties closer in this area. So what I do at this point is I loosen up the criteria a little bit and change the, rather than going out further away, I'll change this and go to last 24 months. And we got a little bit lucky there because we have, again, I was hoping for some comparables over here, and I found 2 that sold within the last 2 years. So let's check those out. Okay, good. So we got 4 acres. Again, ours is right around 4.5 acres. So this is a very good comp, 42,000. It's close by, sold in the last couple of years. The next one, just shy of 5 acres, sold for 50,000. So right then and there, we're saying, okay, so property in this area is selling for right around $10,000 an acre. If we jump over and look at those other 2 that weren't great because they're not dealing with that same vicinity that we like, just still if we look at, let's just say the closest 2 over here, we're still seeing that that's kind of holding true. Now it's a little bit more because maybe they're not dealing with the same floodplain. So pull out our handy calculator here. So we're looking at 65 divided by 5.2. All right, so we're a little bit higher over there, 12,500 per acre. Now if we go to the other one, see, we're sort of seeing a really good solid pattern here, right? We're kind of in that same area for that property. So I'm feeling pretty good about what my maximum bid's gonna be on this, because what we do is we get a gauge on retail value. Next thing we wanna check is, before we do the math on arriving at the maximum bid, is we wanna see how long it took to sell. These properties were lingering for 2 years or a year or 6 months before they sold. That tells us a lot. We also wanna check out anything in the description that might change the apple and apple, right? If we wanna make sure we're looking at apples and apples. So as you review this, everything looks, you know, it doesn't say anything like there's a cabin on the property or anything like that, or a well that would change the value. So I'm happy with that. Well, let's go down to the price history here. So it looks like they were a little high initially. As you can see, 8 of 2023, they had it for 70, dropped it way down a couple months later. And then a month later, dropped it even more. They wanted to sell this property, right? And then we're looking at, well, you know, 4 months. It's still pretty acceptable. I'm always looking for right around 90 days for good demand, so I'm okay with that. It's a little outside that, but, and just happens to be during this time of year. We're in December right now, so that's good that properties are selling in December, because we are in December right now. So I'm okay with that. That looked like they were a little crazy at first. Realtors tend to, you know, get people's hopes up too high, and then they realize they're not getting any offers and they have to drop their price down to what the market is willing to pay. So again, we're right around $10,000 an acre. Let's just kind of do the same thing on this other property. Again, these are 2 good comps that we're liking so far. First, look at the description. They do verify power is on that road, which is what we assumed, and that's great. Fishing, a lot of trees, marketable timber, those are all pros, of course. Plenty of privacy. Okay, so let's go down to the price history on this one. Look at the most recent listed for sale right here. So 7, and then it took them until the first part of the following year to sell the property. So look at that price drop from 85 down to 50,000. We always want to verify that the comps were MLS listings and they weren't some, you know, private sale or, you know, a tax deed sale. We want to know, because this is how we sell our properties, is we find land specialist realtors to sell the properties for us. That's how we prefer to sell them, and we want to make sure the comps are how we're going to sell the property as well. All right, so let's just grab one of these parcel numbers. Everything looks good so far, and let's plug this into id.land and see how close it is to our property. Oh, look at this. This is a good comp because it is dealing with the same floodplain we are dealing with. even though it's not as much, and we will actually factor that in. There's our property right there. This property is just right up the street. This is an ideal comp. So let's get in here and do some measuring on this one. And just see, again, how much buildable area they have. Looks like it's going to be more than ours. Ours was what, 2.5 acres? So roughly 3.5, so an extra acre. We'll just call it an extra acre, which does give this a little bit of an advantage. So we have to make that adjustment in the comp, but it doesn't look like, I would prefer this kind of road access. This definitely looks like a more precarious, narrow, you can't see it nearly as much as the other road. Doesn't look like that's going to be a county maintained road, whereas this one does look like it is a county maintained road. I'm not 100% sure, but just based on visuals, how wide that is and how much development is over there. So what we're going to do is, this is keeping it simple. We're going to establish a conservative resale number of retail value, and then we're going to work backwards and decide what we can bid, maximum allowable bid on the property to make money. Okay, so here we go. We're going to use Zillow again. Confirm that we are looking at $50,000 because we're going to be conservative on this. Again, we're right around $10,000 per acre, but we're going to be conservative because this one did have more buildable space. So I'm going to get out the calculator and we're going to figure out, my rule of thumb is 10%. So we're going to take that, and what we're going to do is we're going to take 10% off that number just because we're being conservative and ours doesn't have as much buildable space. Even though I like the road frontage better on this, we're being extra conservative. So we're just going to take 10% off that number, and that is going to tell me what I'm looking at for a quick resale value. Now I do one more thing called the whoops factor. I take this number and I subtract another 10% because we do not look at these properties in person. We do all of this data with exactly what we're going through today on this class. We're looking at maps. Of course, we do get a realtor on the phone when we're getting closer, and we do a little bit more, but this is the biggest step of this process, the due diligence and figuring out how much money you can bid on that property. Okay, so we're gonna take 10%, which is just another cushion saying, oh, we didn't know about that. Something had to be cleared out. It could even factor in clearing the title because tax deeds do not have marketable title. So whatever factors into that, it's always good to take another 10% off for that number. So that brings it down to $40,500 as a quick resale. Now, that does not factor in selling costs. We like to use land specialist realtors to sell the property, and so we always factor in another 10%. Okay, so we got to take one more 10% off of that. And you guys, there is right there, $36,450. We have subtracted all of our costs, our 10% whoops factor, our 10% selling costs. We've adjusted the comp because it had more buildable area. We're being super conservative here. Always better to err on that side. Now, we just don't want to pay more than 50% of that number. So I just divide that by 2. So guys, my final maximum allowable bid, or MAB as I like to call it, on this property would be right around $18,000. I'd probably go to 20 on that. Anything over that, I walk away. This is how you avoid overbidding at tax deed auctions.